I'm Brooke Fleischman, statewide people here. Kiana, I'm the Nursery curator at Watershed River Association. And I think we wanted to just start with some general intros around the room. It might take a minute, but I think it's important for everyone to kind of understand who's who. So Nick, you want to start? Sorry.
Sure. Nick Bierstead, part of Terra Nursery. Yeah, Dave spoke earlier to all of you, so.
Yep, David Berg, we're Terra Nursery, we're just starting up. Yeah. Bert Heinsberg.
Yeah. Right.
I one run if anyone wants any. Okay. Book a couple here. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Daniel Keeney. I work at the Center for an Agricultural Economy in Hardwick. We run a food hub.
Yeah.
I'm John Snell, among other things, chairman of the tree board in Montpelier for the last 30 years.
I don't want you to get skipped.
Introduction?
Yeah, real quick, yeah.
Oh, sure. Dan Redondo, Vermont Wetland Plant Supply down in Norwell.
My name is Kate Wettergreen. I work at the Franklin County NRCD.
I'm Sarah Foster and I work for the Intervale Conservation Nursery.
I'm Ben Fishbein. I also work at the Conservation Nursery down in the Intervale.
Alex Sale. I'm with Northwood Stewardship Center.
Gus Colby, right here in there. Washington County Soil and Water, Karina Eldridge, I'm in New York.
Ashley Lehman's Washington County Soil and Water, New York. I'm Sadie for the Golden Meadow Conservation District in Champlain Valley.
I'm Avery and I'm also with Holding Meadowy.
Spencer Hardy, the farm upstream and Vermont Center for Eco Studies, the bee biologist.
I'm Tico Wolf. I have a real small but growing nursery in Royalton, Vermont. Broadbrook mountain trees, starting on fruit nut trees, but branching into conservation.
Christine Kramer, I'm with the Intervale Conservation Nursery. Julie Follansby with the DEC Wetlands Program.
Hi, Lauren Silfer, Clean Water Initiative Program at the Department of Environmental Conservation.
I'm Hank. I'm also with the Clean Water Initiative Program. I run the buffer block grant.
I'm Mary, also with the Clean Water Initiative Program and work with the Champlain.
I'm Kate Kelly, Lewis Creek Association.
Hey, y'all. I'm Ben Rogers. I'm the sales manager for the Intervale Conservation District.
Hi, Sarah Coleman from ICHB.
Phil Wilson, Vermont Agency of Agriculture.
Danny Bowens, work with the Clean Water Initiative Program.
Murray McHugh with the Nature Conservancy out of Pulteney.
Peter Emerson, I'm a fish biologist from Vermont Fish in Ohio.
Megan Bell, Essex County Soil and Water, New York.
I'm Eliza Marilis with the Nature Conservancy of Vermont.
Katie Kane, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Taylor Lutwin from the Winooski.
Marina Daly, Restoration Ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council.
I'm Ellen Fox with the Missisquoi River Basin Association.
I'm Toby Shulman with WUF.
Harry Persian from Osable River Association, fish biologist.
Ellen Miller, Possible Conservation Victory. Okay.
Heather Murphy with NRCS out of Middlebury.
Jess Miller, Vermont Association of Conservation Districts.
Sarah Lunn, I'm the field coordinator for the Missisquoi River Basin Association and the Upper Missisquoi and Trout Rivers Wild and Scenic.
Lindsay White with those two overly long named organizations.
I'm Meg Carter. I'm the Conservation Science Director at the Northwood Stewardship Center.
I'm Lillian Corbin. I'm the agriculture specialist and nursery manager at Essex County Natural Resource Conservation District in Vermont.
I'm Sarah Redmond. I'm serving for Eco AmeriCorps as the Northern Waters Steward at Northwood Stewardship Center.
I'm Annie Jackson. I'm with Northwest Nature Center in Montpelier.
Shawn Beckett with North Branch Nature Center also.
I'm Lynn Mata with Watersheds United Vermont.
Chris Smith with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Shawn White, Watershed Forestry Partnership Coordinator.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, that's great, but yeah, it's great. You can come up, there's seats up here too for anyone who's standing, so. And just to give a little bit of context, I wanted to give reason like why is it important to have this conversation? Why is it important to bring all these people together? So with the many pressures in the restoration community that can include climate change as well as evolving techniques and demand, I think it presents an opportunity for collaboration with established and emerging nurseries in our watersheds to adapt to these challenges together. Today, we want to give the space for nurseries and some other practitioners in the room to discuss where they are in their operation currently and what are some of the challenges and opportunities they are considering for the present and in the future. And from this discussion, we'll leave with introductions among nurseries being made and hopefully some tangible next steps of how we can make that happen. So the objectives we have for this discussion today is to identify the current status of nurseries in the region or in our watersheds right now, and then create a collaboration plan, whether that's communication channels or facilitation / trainings, etc. And then, so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the current nursery status, and anyone feel free to speak up about. We heard a little bit from during Ben Rogers and maybe Fisher's presentation, had some people come up from nurseries. Are there any other nurseries that are here that didn't get to talk? Yeah, Tico.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of just said a minute ago, and I've introduced it, but yeah, I have a real small nursery. I started out doing fruit and nut trees, and I kind of am branching into native species to a greater extent. Still, like, you know, I'm on like the hundreds of stem scale instead of the thousands or tens of thousands. Mostly because I'm a one-person operation and I do like 3 other jobs, so it's like down a little bit. I try not to overextend.
Right.
And just trying to understand. I'm also not I'm not trained in. You know, I didn't go to school for nursery production or anything, so I'm just kind of learning as I go. And trying to understand what I can grow, where I'm growing, and time frames and feed collection and all that stuff. So that's just the full intro.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
I can share some about our failures.
Yeah, we'll have a whole section on some of the obstacles.
Learning opportunities.
So my nursery is Vermont Wetland Plant Supply, and it's a wholesale operation down in Orwell at the southern end of Lake Champlain. And so I started the nursery in 2007. I used to do environmental conservation for Pioneer Environmental Associates when they were based in or known as that in Virginia before they transitioned to VHB. I did stream restoration, and when we did our contract drawings, I would see all of our plant material was coming in from out of state. There was just no supply for those types of projects, because at that point, the Intervale, it was really for prep projects type things. And so when a wetland restoration project was related to a commercial development, there really wasn't a supply of plant material. Primarily, we focused on herbaceous plants in plug form for a lot of stormwater management, and then people started asking us for the container material. And then slowly but surely, we've been migrating into pollinator species, upland pollinator, basically all types of habitat. So at our nursery, we pretty much cover all types of habitat: aquatic, subaquatic, emergent, all the way up into the upland material. And many of you have bought seeds or plants from us in the past. Some of you could be new customers, but we're a small and a long-standing nursery doing this. And we've got some thoughts about how we'd like to participate and contribute to this group, as well as also concerns about how this group potentially represents a threat to our business. So And I think there's a strong distinction between what nurseries do as a for-profit nursery versus state-sponsored or tax-structured organizations where they take advantage of much different diversity of funding sources. So I think it's a frank discussion I'm willing to have because it does contribute greatly to our success. I can give you an example with about 8 years ago, I had a project where an earthwork contractor said, Dan, I'd like you to harvest willows for us. It's going to be, we need 10,000 willows in stakes in the fall. I'm like, great, this is going to be an awesome project. The guy said, we're going to go with 2,000 a week. And so we did the 2,000 and we started our next 2,000. And he said, you know what? We're going to get them at the local conservation district for free. So I sunk labor into it, space, storage, and, you know, there was a huge loss. And for to go to a local government supported nursery was painful. So it's tough when you hear other soil and water conservation districts starting to establish their own nurseries. Like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to talk about. And I think that's something a lot of us experience of like getting maybe some promises about potential projects and then them not actually coming to fruition. So if there's a way that we can find some type of like overall planning together in order to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't necessarily happen. Any other nurseries that want to? Okay. I just want to reiterate real quick too, I spoke about seeds, but I just want to bring it back around that that is an opportunity to collaborate, to come together, potentially get some sourcing for nursery operations, as well as support the overall supply that we're working with in the state for locally adapted native species. So just bring that in, but I think now we'll really like open it up for the discussion. And I think Kiana will take that over right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for opening this up. I feel like that's a great place to start. Yeah, I know most of you through my work at Intervale Conservation Nursery. So I'm kind of coming here with a new hat. One of the biggest challenges of nursery work, I think, one of the things that there's a lot of obstacles when it comes to nursery work. But one that I kind of wanted to touch on to start with, I think, is the kind of like the timing lag of these, projects, project planning, and both like the production supply chain, growing native trees and shrubs and plants, obviously, from start to finish, it takes years, not months. We're talking here, so a lot can happen during that long span of time. And so, one thing I kind of wanted to bring up as this discussion is, how do we kind of tackle this kind of time lag while we're thinking about project planning or bidding projects or talking about contracts, because without official contract growing, it's difficult to plan for future investments, whether it's for profit or not for profit nurseries. So I guess I'll kind of throw that out there and see if anyone has anything they want to roll with from here in that vein. But yeah, that's one. I guess that's more of my experience at ICN rather than beginning at Osceola River Association, where we're more of an emerging nursery. So I don't know if anyone has anything to.
I'll just add on to that my predecessor, Allison Adams, had started looking into contract growing. And so one question I have is, do I continue following that path, whether that makes sense? Whether that's the best place to put some of my efforts. And there's also, we've had a little bit of discussion about some kind of tree hub where we've got centralized distribution and sales, whether that might whether there's some way we could work either, some kind of stability into that system. I don't know what exactly that would be, but, in putting that together, whether it makes sense, maybe I could get someone to do some sort of market analysis, feasibility study that incorporates contract growing, distribution, sales, all of that, and just sort of would it be helpful for me to try to get a grant to do that? So that we can kind of look at the whole big picture all at once.
I'm not sure if anyone has already seen this survey that was posted in 2021, I believe, by Annalise Carrington and Allison Adams, but we're happy to share it around afterwards. But there's a lot of information that they gathered in 2021 about the supply chain in Vermont, both for nurseries and for practitioners. And one thing I've been curious about is this information still relevant now? Here we are in 2024. Are those statistics that they gathered in 2021? Is that still kind of the guidelines that we're using when we're talking about production and statewide goals and statewide demand, or do we need to revisit that and kind of check back in with both suppliers and purchasers? I think because I think we're all hearing a lot about the demand for local native stock, and whether and we're seeing some of that, but also there seem to be some hiccups along the way as we plan these projects and plan investments. So just another kind of obstacle I can see.
I think it'd be great to have to quantify what the number of plants are per year. And going forward 2025, 2026, as best you can, so that people have a sense of, what the capacity of the state is to handle that versus coming in from out of state. Because it's frankly, I do hear a lot of that, like, we just don't have enough local stock. And then I'm like, and I heard Intervale today say they're underselling.
Right.
How's that?
Yeah.
How are we then encouraging new nurseries to show up on the scene?
Right.
When the Intervale is underselling?
Yeah.
Right.
That's, if they're not selling their plants, who is? And
Yeah.
It doesn't make a good business model for our startups. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about the Intervale and the underselling issue, and Christine, maybe you can answer. Is the crew time also sold out? Because for larger projects like a CREP project, we don't just need the material, we need the labor to plant it. So if that's not available, then like it's both for us. Like that's the bottleneck.
Yeah, and I think that like on our end, we could potentially run 2 crews next year. And if that need is there, that we need to know that in order to staff 2 crews to accommodate people's projects.
Right.
But we can't do that if there aren't enough projects. So I think that the conversations just aren't connecting between us.
Yep.
So that's a good conversation. And Ben, he's going to be taking over our sales and our services. So he will be able to really have those comprehensive conversations with you guys directly. Great. But yeah, we have the ability to add crews if the demand is there. That's a good point, Katie. Thank you.
From conversations people have been having, what are their theories out there of like why there's less being planted or less being sold? Has anyone had conversations like that of like just not buying trees or?
I can't speak to that, but I have a question.
Yeah.
That relates. Has anybody been able to quantify the number of trees produced and sold in state versus coming from out of state? Are we still buying a lot of trees from out of state when there's unsold trees that we're growing here? Because, we all deal with money, and sometimes the economies of scale of some of those big faraway nurseries might be having an effect on, nobody said that yet. So
Right.
here it is.
Yeah.
I think that was some of the information that was captured in the 2021 survey. But I guess that's a good question, is that, are those numbers that we have, in writing here, are those still relevant? Or do we need to, reassess those numbers?
Well, I also had a survey this December that kind of tried to like follow up from all of that, and there are some numbers. We can pass around some paperwork. I wasn't sure if that would be like conducive or not, since I only had like 8 copies. I didn't realize that I don't know how many people would see it. But we can definitely like share that around, because I think as of right now, like 55% of the trees being planted are from nurseries out of the state. So it's a large portion of the trees.
Do we have any price comparisons? I haven't done that. I could have. Or, I could do that. I see invoices.
They're the
It's not
same.
that different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that price point is a motivator. I think it's more the idea that supply and demand are independent variables is false. That, as long as it takes for us to grow a tree out, it also takes that long to develop a project. And so if there's this sense from the planting end that, oh, we don't have all the trees we need, sort of like back off the project development a little bit. And so we're just sort of out of sync. And I think that communication will solve a lot of the things that we're talking about here.
Can I just clarify, Ellen, so you're saying that you actually did less project development because you didn't think the trees were gonna be.
Right. And also there's a plethora of funding for other kinds of projects now too. So like an organization of 3 to 5 to 10 people that were all planting in previous years. Now we're doing other kinds of clean water projects. And so there's a capacity limitation there as well. So there were fewer planting projects in the pipeline.
There's a lot of layers to this onion, right?
Mhm.
And if you start to kind of peel this back, most of the trees that are being planted are associated with voluntary conservation, which means you have to have a landowner that says yes to something. If we start to look at, then the next driver in some of this is what is the funding that is working with that landowner or helping that landowner. And we saw all the numbers come up on the screen today. And none of those numbers were associated with USDA. Okay, USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, Travis, I heard one who's the one, I will not put Heather on the spot. NRCS is gonna see $19 billion nationwide over the next 5 years to do conservation work. Much of that conservation work is directed towards climate change and practice 391, repairing forest buffer, is one of the things that's going to be driven, or that money will help to drive. What that looks like in the state of Vermont, you step that down, it's not going to be 19 billion coming to the state of Vermont, but they're going to see, they're 12 million a year double in some of these, for some of these programs. That is going to drive the conservation out on the ground and to find those landowners, all the folks in the room. It may be something that's funded with the funding sources we saw earlier. It may be something that's funded with USDA money. But if we look at what that is coming down the pike, I can't believe that we aren't going to be able to sell nursery stock grown in Vermont. And now there's a bubble to that. That money all has to be off the NRCS books by December 31, 3031, or it goes away, goes back to the US Treasury. So some of this isn't, I get the issue that the nursery has to say, okay, how do I stock up? And then if the demand isn't going to be there, but part of that is understanding, and I've talked with Intervale for years kind of about this issue. Some of it is reading what these tea leaves are telling us with where the funding's coming from and what is driving that funding. And tree planting or tree establishment or buffers and water quality are some of the things that are driving that. So I can't tell you what it looks like. The crystal ball isn't that clear to say what 2026 is going to mean for the number of stems in Vermont. And then the last thing is the political process drives some of it. there still is not the 2018 Farm Bill has expired. And we need a new Farm Bill, and we're waiting on Congress to pass a Farm Bill, which then will activate different language in the CREP program that will facilitate more projects. So again, all of this is just to say there's a lot of different layers, and yes, it would be great to say we're gonna need 80,000 stems in 2026 and have at it. Everybody start growing. It's not that clear, but if you look at the big picture, it seems like there's a bubble here that we're gonna get to around plant material. And I don't know if that helps, but there is more to this than just, okay, where's my individual project at that local watershed?
Yeah, I think it's good to bring it that high level to see like where all of this starts and how can we plan from that, so.
Just to follow up on that, and maybe then you can maybe talk to us. Like, do you get the sense that you're limited in terms of funding right now? I mean, I thought there was just tons of money, and then are you able to get rid of all the funds that you have?
I mean, I think that what we're seeing, and I was gonna build on Ellen, I feel like you were really hitting it, like, I think that the capacity, because I was really surprised to hear from Intervale this morning about the trees as well, because what I hear from groups is like, we don't have, like, there isn't the tree availability, so that's interesting. So that, like, the first thing is like, let's make sure that we're increasing our conversation among all of us practitioners around like what trees are available, especially with these new nurseries coming online. But I do think that over the last few years, the capacity constraint is real. And if we don't have enough practitioners doing the implementation of these, developing these projects, implementing these projects, working with the landowners, then I think that to me feels like it's a bottleneck in terms of this work happening. So it seems like it's like this perception that there's not enough trees and like what's going on with that, which I'd love to hear more about. And then also the sort of capacity constraints, which and the fact that groups are working on sort of a wider breadth of project types at this point in time. But let's make sure that we're trying to figure out how to increase. And I'm also really interested in the gaps in the state where maybe where plantings aren't happening. Like I think we have a number of implementing groups in certain parts of the state, and then there's gaps, I think, in other parts of the state where that isn't happening, and how do we build that capacity in those areas?
Yeah, I think it's a really complex conversation for sure with a lot of moving parts. And from a grower standpoint, right, we say we have unsold stems, and we talk about stems as this kind of like lump number, but what we're actually dealing with is like variety of sizes, variety of species. So even if we have unsold stems, at the Intervale, are they not sold because they're not the right stems for these projects? Like, should we be shifting, into other species, other sizes, like slimming it down on the offering? So I think from a grower standpoint, like getting all of the nurseries in the state to align on like what the actual demand is, what the numbers we're looking at, and what the species and sizes are, and to like kind of be able to make a plan so that we're not, like competing, but having a more robust, stronger kind of producer presence in the state, I think is going to be really key. Just because that, when we say stems, it's a very general term, but I think it's a lot more specific and complicated than that. And I think that's an easy thing we can solve. Conversation have.
One of the things about watershed groups having sort of their own nursery, if you will, and Pulteney Meadowy is a good example of this, is that like as a project manager, I should be thinking about including a grower when I start to talk to somebody about a project. So like this idea of contract growing, I would go even further. It's not just, it's a back and forth of like, well, what do you have? Well, what can we use in this project? Oh, this is our ideal, 12 target species. Oh, well, what do you have? What grows well in your area? It's a collaborative kind of thing as you go along so that you know where those trees are going to come from when you start to talk about the project.
Yeah, I'd like to, that makes a lot of sense. I'm new to the conservation growing, but I've been growing for the ornamental trade for over a decade. Yeah. And there's always a supply demand thing. Retail is like, instant, but in this case, what you said just dawned on me that like, if these projects are in the works for years, getting all the ducks in a row, that's exactly the time that a grower needs to produce the stuff. And it seems spot on to kind of look at it more of like a partnership type of thing, whereas if an organization could get in touch with a grower, or, and work on a project in a back and forth way,
Right.
that would really help both entities, I think, a lot.
And I think
with
that-
the security issue.
Like the Intervale grew up that way. It became really successful, that it was a CREP Intervale partnership. That sort of made it a mainstay. So maybe we replicate that model more locally.
Yeah,
I think Daniel.
Oh, I was just curious, based on what you said, Ellen, what's the flexibility in funding to prepay or sign a binding contract with a grower? Those costs of production
Yeah.
are incurred 2 years before the sale.
Yeah.
None
I
right
go into
now. Lindsay, maybe you want to speak to
I
that.
mean, I'm lucky that I have two organizations, one of which gives me pretty much a lump sum money, and they share one bank account. But I go into debt to buy my trees,
Mhm.
and that's my contract with the grower, and then I eventually get reimbursed. I have the flexibility to do that because I have one bank account that gets filled by two organizations.
Like, I don't know, it is encouraging to hear that potentially is a lot of money coming down. But like the grower is kind of the last one to see that dollar, and it's the most upfront cost, and like usually the lowest paid. So it's kind of hard to like plan a business around like, oh, well, maybe like millions of dollars might come this way, but I mean, you don't know until you know. So just from, I've seen like some of this happen in like vegetable production as well. So yeah, it's hard as a new grower in this field to like plan around like money eventually being there. And I understand that like it can't be guaranteed right now. But like maybe a little more direction or conversations around potentially like what a contract would look like, or some sort of even just verbal commitment. I think like the growers seem to be there and like wanting to produce. It seems to be a disconnect of like, all right, what do we want? When do we want it? And like figuring out how to get there.
I think that was some of the impetus behind the Lake Champlain Basin program, getting that money, getting some money out, recognizing that the startup, that a lot of this is front end loaded. And that's why, again, I advocated for that money being directed to startup nurseries to get over that, that hurdle.
I mean, we're the prime example of that. I mean, that's like how we're lifting this thing off the ground right now.
Yeah.
So without it, we probably wouldn't be here. So it is working, but it's thinking like 3 years down the line, 4 years down the line, like how do you continue to perpetuate that growth and continue to fulfill those needs that everyone seems to think are there.
I was wondering if anybody that's doing planting plans and implementing could speak to sort of the species selection and flexibility in that realm, because is there just a disconnect between planting plans and species that were selected for or some reason but are not available in the state, and so they're maybe those are getting purchased out of state when they could be subbed something else, and we just aren't thinking about it in that way. Anybody that's an implementer that's making planting plans? Yeah.
A good example of what you're talking about here is like a manatee, for example. This has become a really big species within the state for restoration because it's not susceptible to deer browse, grows quickly, does well transplant wise. On a growing standpoint, very difficult to propagate, 2-year dormancy for the seeds, very tricky. So a lot of those stems are coming in from out of state because we can't, like, one, grow the number that we need, and two, flip them quick enough. So That's a species, so that's something, you know, if this is a species we're gonna move forward with, like maybe some investment on the producer side to like speed that process up or like figure out a way to kind of crack that nut might be a good opportunity. And that's just one example. I'm sure there's others, but
I was just wondering if you could expand on what species are coming in from out of state, and you're getting at it a little bit of nannyberry is difficult to grow, and if there an opportunity for technical assistance there in state to grow these more difficult plants? Like, are there, I think you've got in softwoods, for example, from Michigan, and filling that gap through technical assistance.
and maybe other producers have other experience with, I know from my experience, like growing conifers, since they're such slow growing species, like we've kind of tapered off with growing those in the production field to save space for things that are gonna flip a little bit quicker. So we've been outsourcing, we've been kind of shifting the resale to outsourcing the conifer, you know, like the cedars, pines, all of that, because they just aren't economical to grow to the size that people need for their projects. So I guess that's another kind of grower standpoint on, you know, the different species that we're kind of outsourcing. I don't know if anyone else who grows conifers here, but yeah.
I can just speak, I mean, so, I mean, for crop projects, generally, you know, we're developing a planting plan and yeah, obviously, we make a lot of substitutions based on what's available. But the other thing that's, is we work with, you know, the contract holder, the landowner to, you know, to pick a contractor, do the work, that they're hiring the contractor. These conservation programs and the money passes through the landowner. And so, you know, we have some, obviously we can specify what gets planted, but not necessarily where it comes from. So it's, you know, work with, you know, Intervale that do plantings, Northwoods, you know, other, you know, foresters, you know, we don't get to dictate necessarily where those trees come from, just what gets planted.
I will add to the question about project planning and planting plans that, I mean, I do think we've seen a trend of planting plans getting more selective over the years as, you know, you mentioned deer browse, Kiana, and we're seeing a lot more pressures on these projects. And so I think the days are behind us where, you know, it's just like, oh, yep, this available, we'll take that, and it'll all work out. Because we've seen now that a lot of the time it doesn't. And so I'm wondering with new nurseries coming online, if there's a greater need for coordination there in terms of like the primary restoration species that people are really looking for versus it's really helpful to hear the challenges that you have in propagating some of those. And like, where do we have that common ground and where do we not? Yeah.
Or the number of trees that are coming in from out of state, that 55% that you mentioned, is the Coldstream number that Intervale gets also contributing to that out of state number?
There's a separate resale percentage that's different from that. I can't say off the top of my head what it is, but it's another, like, say, 5% for resale.
So the local number that you mentioned earlier includes the Coldstream for the locally.
So no, it's separate. It's separate.
Right.
Yeah, there's the like bought directly from out of state, resale, and then locally purchased. Yeah.
I have many thoughts. Let me try to find one that I want to express. I wanted to give the perspective. I love the idea of maybe found housing like these are the species that are doing well, and that would be amazing. I get nervous about there being a centralized hub. That's why I'm excited to see all these new nurseries going up, because I live in the Northeast Kingdom and my options for planting, and I did this early on in my position, were to get up at 5 a.m., drive to the Intervale, pick up my trees, drive to the planting site, meet my crew, host volunteers, figure out how to store the trees that we didn't get in the ground. It was impossible personally to maintain that. So I've started balancing out of state trees that show up at my house and I just have to store them versus coming down to the Intervale because it's too far. So I think the idea of diversifying and having littler, well, or maybe bigger hubs throughout the state, I'm really excited about that. And, you know, we're gonna host one, so it's gonna be like, drive 2 miles to get my treats, hopefully, but, you know, I hope that that is a resource for everybody, and I'm, you know, very much plan to continue connecting with the Intervale and probably still getting stock, because we're gonna plant certain species. So I think having Shawn at the helm of like, this is what's available in different parts, you know, like, hey, Northeast Kingdom grows this really well. You know, figure out with MRBA what, you know, how to get that.
I wonder if there's a possibility to loop, like a deep root into this conversation, so, I don't know. Deep root's basically like they're a food hub that picks up from ag or vegetable growers throughout the state. But it's kind of like all over the place, all a bunch of different food hubs. So it's the model that's being talked about. It's already happening. Like I wonder, they're refrigerated trucks, because they're moving produce. Like I wonder if there's the possibility of like tagging that onto it rather than trying to like develop a system it's already happening, just with different products. I don't know, it's a thought.
Yeah.
Especially with like the food, well, it's the food hub's back, right? Sort of.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I mean, like that would be a great example of, yeah, like that, those mechanisms are not really kind of in place.
You run into some food safety issues when you're working with, you know, like benefiting the soil for like storing it in the city,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like.
Yeah, I think that would be a great template to follow. Like it's something that's already in place for food security and distribution. So why not just kind of like follow suit with that? I think I'm wondering too, kind of like the hub situation, if it makes sense, or love to hear people's thoughts on like specializing in certain species based off of certain projects. Like I know Spencer's been talking about like pollinator shrubs and things like that. So like if it makes sense, if a project is focused on like pollinator habitat, then they would talk to Spencer. Or if they're talking about, you know, specifically like floodplain restoration, then you would talk to another group. Or does that sound like something that would be feasible for people? Like we can kind of just each focus on certain species, or?
I think from my perspective, just knowing what other people are growing and what's being planted would be really helpful. Like,
Yeah.
I'll grow shrub willow if that's what the demand is, but if there's 6 other growers that are doing it cheaper than I am, I'll do something else that people want.
Yeah, so just being aware of what other people are doing with the market. And force yourself to make the decisions that grow the same thing that everyone else. I'd love to see maybe Intervale or somebody focus on propagation. Because that's a really big step in production that is kind of unique. And I know that there's a lot of effort that goes into propagating. It doesn't really pan out monetarily. I think that's where some of these larger nurseries in the Midwest have really, you know, there's this economy of scale where they're just producing thousands of these little things. I mean, it would, and I've talked to you guys about this before, but it would be, I would imagine, cheaper for me to buy in already started plants, you know, rooted cuttings, than to produce them myself. So if there was a place in state that was focusing on just production, just getting the roots on, you know, getting those either to seedling or rooted cutting status, it would make it a lot easier for other growers to just focus on growing and not, because the propagation step is such a intense one. And you really got to be constantly monitoring. It's very time consuming. If we could take that out and have someplace where we could get that stuff, that would be a huge benefit to me.
Yeah, you know, they have this position website, to be able to do that, grow the capacity for propagation, putting up a new greenhouse, kind of expand, that's an area that operation has the capacity to like expand into. So I think there is a little bit of a thought there.
I was just gonna comment, well, I definitely think that's a great idea. I would just have, as coming from the seed collection, kind of genetic diversity preservation viewpoint, would it be possible to do that propagation, but really make sure that like local populations are still like getting sampled and taken from, and then also that not everyone is selling the same like couple individuals that have been propagated from all over the state?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think that's why it's so beneficial maybe that my position is based out of the Intervale and that we're doing food collection all across the state and we can kind of like follow suit in all of those ways, like it was collected in this seed zone. If you're a nursery in that seed zone, you can have, we can make it what we want at this point, depending on what people's needs are and what their interest is in like that locally adapted genetic material. So I can totally see that being a thing, especially we're having a lot of conversation about what the cost of that is like and how to make that available for people, because I think it will be a little bit different based off of the effort that goes into the propagation. So like species that don't need any pre-treatment to propagate, that those would be, relatively cheaper. The ones that need to go through dormancy and for like any other kind of treatment beforehand would be a little bit higher on that. So just to get like a sense of where we're at with that at this point.
I have a question for like the practitioners in the room. I know we've talked a little bit about, like the nursery obstacles to producing and all of that, but in terms of, different funding sources have different criteria for, what kind of stock you're buying in. So some funding sources will be, demand that it's from Vermont, some are like size requirements, some are, price per stem. Do any practitioners who can anyone speak to like, I don't know, if someone gets, most of their funding from one source, what is like your biggest kind of obstacle to purchasing stock? Is it size, species, source, all that?
I can talk a little bit to that. I mean, I don't know of any funding that says you have to have local stock. There's, I think, the Woody Buffer Block Grant that Watershed United manages. I think there's something that says locally grown stems are recommended or something, but there's no hard and fast requirement. Or for size, I think it's just a general recommendation. 35 feet is what's recommended, but there's no requirement, or there's no requirement for cost either.
So, yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I think the reason that the requirement isn't there is because especially at the time where that grant was established, right, there was not enough Vermont stock. So if you required it, you might not be able to do planting if you didn't have it, but it is a recommendation. Native species is a requirement. Vermont stock is a recommendation. And I think it's good that it used to be that there was a cost per acre that we had to stay below. And that doesn't exist anymore. And that is in part to allow for people to be able to purchase local stock that might be more expensive. So I think that has been a good thing, that there isn't that like a cutoff in terms of the funding amounts in order to reach that goal.
I'm not like really directly involved in managing funding these types of projects, but I have been in conversations where cost per stem has come up, and just reflecting on how this partnership could be a really good avenue to educate the different funding groups about all the different factors that contribute to the cost per stem, and to give a little bit more context instead of having these kind of rules of thumb about what should be expected for cost per stem.
And just to add on to that, I think we don't know, right? I mean, because that you're pulling in lots of different, funding sources and grants, and so aren't necessarily having to track how much is it really costing us to produce these trees, and are we selling them at a profit or a loss or whatever? It's not such a big question on your end, but, and, if we put something together that's more of a cooperative growing situation, then we'll need to kind of figure out that price point, which I think we really don't know. So we're not able to go back to the funders and say, this is how much it really costs to grow a local tree. So if you want local trees, we need more money. We need this amount.
Well, this group was a product of just exactly what you described. So originally, when there was funding coming out at state levels, there was a cap. And this group pushed to say, no, that doesn't work. Now, unfortunately, that you can make those adjustments at the local level. Mentioned USDA, they're making, right, Phil? I mean, these are national cost caps. So it's not something that the Vermont USDA gets to adjust. It is something that is done at the national level, and that's what you get. And if you want to plant trees, that's what the cost share rates are.
Well, that's, funding through EQIP and CSP, but through CREP, through the state committee, we can adjust our max, how much we can pay per acre, and we do that this year. So we have adjusted our maximum as time goes on, as cost.
It could increase that, but it's still a max.
But like if we choose landowner picks a contractor and say that Northwood's planning to, we don't know the break, if they buy material from ICN, we don't know their breakdown. We don't dictate the breakdown between labor and material costs or where the material comes from. Other than same hardness zone, I think the standard just doesn't speak to that's where we can fill those things from, issues.
Yeah, just on that, as a startup, this is that feels like a really pertinent question, because I'm never gonna compete with Coldstream. I have no interest in doing that. I'm not interested in running a conventional nursery or growing hundreds of thousands or millions of stems necessarily. So right now I'm sort of in a trial period. And I got into this in part because I was encouraged to do so by the Watershed Partnership, who do plan. I don't think they're not here today, but basically Greg Russ just kept nudging me towards growing native species, and finally I was like, sure, I'll do it. We'll see how this works. But long term, if it's going to be effective, I think there has to be, I have to know that there's going to be a premium paid for locally grown stock from locally collected seeds, or it's just never going to last. So, I mean, I understand that it's super complicated in terms of figuring out where the money comes from, what the requirements are for each grant and per project and all that stuff. But to make it sustainable going forwards, it's a big question.
Yeah, I guess kind of switching gears, what are some big questions for this group that we would kind of maybe want to walk away from this conversation either having or answering? Are there what are our kind of priorities in terms of trying to figure out, the supply demand, what are, species, communication structure, all of that, kind of trying to take this really complex issue and move forward in some direction. What are some priorities for students?
I'd love to hear more from practitioners about species that they're interested in, species that they're having trouble sourcing, or things that or what their criteria are for considering other species. Some things that are easy to grow that I'd love to grow more of that I don't see the demand for, and probably vice versa.
Things that deer don't eat.
I think it'd be really helpful to see costs of production from existing tree nurseries, because it seems like without understanding, what the costs of production per stem are for nurseries in Vermont, we can't pinpoint a realistic price. And to try to do so seems like folly.
Well, I'm, I'm also keeping it.
Okay, so we've got up to then.
So is that something that you, that, those of you who are running nurseries, would you be willing to, I mean, what you know now, would you be willing to share that with the group? I mean, or do you feel like that's something you would want to close to your chest? Or you know yet?
You wanna complain about the thing that costs too much, close to your chest, the things you're waiting on.
Speaking as a business planner who works with a lot of farms, I think probably the best way of approaching that would be to collect it in the aggregate confidentially. And then maybe categorized by group of trees based on, or groups of species based on sort of the difficulty of growing. Maybe any specific infrastructure or equipment you would need for a group of species, and you could, group the cost of production a little bit.
That could also give growers an idea of where other nurseries are, have certain efficiencies and that sort of thing, and maybe help share that information a little bit more.
See, as now an emerging nursery, on the other side of it, I see a group like this being really beneficial for sharing resources, knowledge, equipment, maybe stuff like that. So kind of working together as more nurseries come online, both with established nurseries and ones that are kind of coming out of the room.
I think as a private for-profit nursery, I think it's critical to understand that the demand for the plants requires the infrastructure. The infrastructure requires funds. Funds for private nursery means to come from our own bank accounts, our own profit margins, our own growth, whereas funds for a nonprofit supported nursery for the conservation district can come from the grant. Big difference. Huge difference. There's realizing that somebody just got a $25,000 grant to install 2 greenhouses. Like, well, that's just 25 grand I don't have to compete with. That's a big factor.
The Lake Champlain Basin funding that was open to for-profit business, that was huge. That was a game changer, and in my knowledge, that wasn't ever the case before. So that was, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I jumped at that opportunity, and that was the reason we're here. The only reason we're here today. We would absolutely not be sitting here if it was not for that funding. So it's hypercritical.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about an unknown future, like who the heck would invest in their private resources in a big question mark. Yeah.
I would love to see what other barriers are there for implementers to buy locally, right? That we're not thinking about, like MRBA talking about, like a logistical problem, right? That maybe it's not like something a hub or some other mechanism or delivery service or something could, but like, that might not be something that a grower's thinking about, right? Like what is somebody not telling you that is causing a barrier that could be solved effectively?
I'd say labor is a big factor. Labor versus that you have to hire versus labor that you can get via volunteers. That's a pretty big factor, especially if it's where you get a group that comes in and can donate their time for replanting a field that's for a nursery, and then they can write that off as a tax deduction because it's going towards a charitable or a nonprofit organization. Whereas, you can't, as a private nursery, you can't really get volunteer labor investments.
I think just having a centralized information hub of who are the current nurseries, what do they specialize in, what sort of stock do they have, or could they expect to have? As a tree buyer, that would be really handy, to make sure that we knew what was there before heading out of state for anything.
I would say the flip side too, as a grower, it'd be really good to have doing project, things they're gonna be doing projects in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Like
Who to
the
contact, find out if you need stuff, so.
the wish list tab.
Right, yeah, the wish list. It also would be great to make sure that growers aren't getting that information and then running and saying, oh, everyone wants nannyberry. Every single one of us is gonna focus on growing nannyberry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that understanding the statewide demand as a group is really key to being able to plan moving forward as you know, as nurseries pop up. So, yeah, maybe, yeah, reassessing those numbers and seeing what, and I liked what you were saying, reading the tea leaves, assessing the current numbers and maybe making some group projections, like informed projections about what's coming down the pipeline. Yeah.
I think following that thread of the contract growing as well, it sounds like it would be a really good thing to follow through, see what the opportunity there is there for that. Just from getting a set of,
Especially for larger stock material. And you're talking, trying to get that 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 foot plant here. In some cases, you're talking 3 to 4 years of growing. You know, it's one thing to grow a 3 to 4 foot willow in a single season, but it's quite a bit different story if you're gonna try to do speckled alder.
Right.
Actually, and promise of the rainbow coming down 3 years down the line, it's, something like, yeah, hold on, it's a long lead time.
On the subject of the centralized conservation up again from the point of view of the grower, this is sort of, I think, what we said already, but one of the things that was really helpful for me in doing a little bit of planning at this very early stage was talking with Greg Russ and the Watershed Partnership. Basically, he said, here's the list of species, you know, like my top 15. If you can grow something approaching these numbers for these, I'll buy them. And he gave me a spreadsheet that showed his numbers for those species for the last 5 years for the project. So I just said, you know, I can see there's variability there, but I can also see which ones he plants every year and, you know, roughly what numbers. That's something like that. I'm sure would be helpful for other growers also.
I know we have some versions of that.
Well, I think the contract growing piece is interesting, right? I've explored this for a while. And because I do think that there's opportunities to get some upfront money here, right? Again, we've heard about things that 5 years ago, nobody would have thought of, that there was grants for private startups, that we're funding stewardship, that we're taking caps off plant cost per acre. So I do think that that's the reason we're all together, is so that we can push these ideas forward. I think that on the contract growing side of it, there's 2 sides of it, right? So in other words, if there's some money up front, there's got to be a guarantee on the plans on the back end, right? And then that puts the nursery side of the room on the hook for those things. So as I've explored this with a couple nurseries, it just was hard to get them there.
It's scary.
It is.
Yeah.
Even when you're saying, you can come up with, you know, what's the number? 20 grand, we'll decide on the cost per stem.
Yeah.
We'll get this, you know, 3/4 of up front, and then the last is gonna come. So those types of things, I think it's a great conversation to have. And I think that we could make some headway on it if we got to a place where everybody was in a kind of an agreement that we can do this. So this is a place to be having that conversation.
Well, and I wonder if there is some sort of centralized, if it's like co-op kind of, or, you know, I don't know if co-op's the right word, but, you know, some kind of distribution, then there'd be a little bit of cushioning, you know, like if one nursery had trouble one year, that others could fill that in. I don't know.
I like to echo again that
that this is already being done, with vegetable production.
Yeah,
So like,
that's the idea.
deep root again is like a great example of, they agreed to basically say 15 cases of cabbage. That's not a guarantee that they're gonna buy all 15, but it's kind of like I don't know, it's a handshake that like, we're gonna do our best to sell those cases if you provide them. And then there's an overarching association of growers that pay in, so it's a co-op. And if that producer, say, has issues growing that, then, there's another one that they can potentially call on that has extra. So like, it seems to work fairly well, at least from in my experience on that side of things. So I feel like this wouldn't be a big jump. It seems like it'd be a fairly good fit.
I think it's really interesting. That model depends on export of product though. Like Deep Root is sort of organized to take produce from here and market it at a margin somewhere away from here.
Sure.
Where this is like got an extra layer of interesting complexity to it in that it's a trade organization or a cooperative that's made of both producers and customers, together, which I don't know what to call that. But I think it's a good road for us to go down.
And I do think another layer to that then is that the customers in this case don't have the upfront money, because at least all of the grants that I am aware of are cost reimbursable, not upfront dollars. And again, that's something this group can, like, we've made changes. We've been working on that advocacy piece around getting more upfront grants, but right now that's not the reality. And I feel like this model kind of relies on that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think if there was something that was developed to say, this is what it looks like, whether it's a cooperative or whether this is how a contract would grow and we need upfront money to do that. I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility for the grant organizations, whether it be the state or if it's whoever, if we could make that basic program, kind of make that compelling argument. But I think we have to can't just go and say, hey, yeah, we want to do contract growing now and give us some money for that. I think there has to be a way. This is what it looks like.
I'm getting curious, Dan, your perspective on this, maybe some of the other growers, if you know the contract situation. Like you said, I wouldn't necessarily want like all the money up front, because then if you have a crop failure, you're just on the hook massively. I would rather have like a deposit of some percent, and then more important, it would be that in writing, if I can produce this, you're on the hook to
buy
it at this rate. That's the most important part, just knowing that you don't have the situation that Dan had where you had a handshake agreement with somebody, and then next thing you know, they're like, no, I'm gonna go get some of this. That's where you feel like the rug just totally got pulled out from under you.
I have a question, I guess, for the grant tours is, for a project someone's applying for now, could a implementer and a producer be grantees together? So they're applying as a team, is that a solution for this problem?
Yeah.
I think one piece as a grower, when we're talking about contract growing, thinking about, the Intervale, it was one example this year of, climate change, increased flooding, crop failure, like these are going to be really real obstacles that continue to present themselves over the next few years. And how do we kind of roll that into this conversation as we, we're not going to probably pick up the Intervale and move it out of the floodplain. So how are we going to, kind of work around that, or is there a workaround?
I feel like to Julie's point, there have been a lot of projects that we've had to purchase for in the past where one source one stem source was not, didn't quite do it because of numbers, species, size, all those complicating factors. So I feel like it's, feel like it kind of makes sense to have one applicant that didn't include the grower, but it would be great if there was a way to make sure that growers weren't going out of business before their crop came to age.
The deep root example is an interesting one. Maybe we're talking to Fedco in Maine there. They buy trees from over, lots of small, or a bunch of small producers. So in terms of like, how does like a tree hub work? Not that that's the way it should be, but they might have interesting perspective.
I think the sort of elephant in the room is where's the money coming from? And the demand is going to increase, whether we acknowledge that and pay for it or not is unknown, but post flood is a great time to talk about money. And we lost 400 trees in Montpelier like that, in a nursery we just started up, and they're gone because they're in a floodplain. But I do think that this group and the broad and diverse and yet united interests that you have is a great advocate for more money or having a say in how the money that's coming is spent and controlled. And if you don't use that voice, then you're just at the mercy of whatever.
But I'm wondering, is there an association or a group that could regularly meet that could come out of this group so that everyone continues to check in with one another? And I know we all have tons of free time, but it just seems like what a great group of folks that we got together. And this is a very rich conversation, and to keep that going in some way.
I think that's a really good point, because in terms of asking for funding for, like, let's say if we wanted to do some sort of market analysis, feasibility study, if we had Association of Conservation Nurseries or something like that, I just feel like that would be. So that it would show some real cohesivity before we even apply.
There is a Vermont Nursery and Landscape Association, which is very much centered on ornamental horticulture.
Maybe a subgroup.
But there is that group, which I'm a part of, has been trending more towards native and more towards habitat and that type of, like when I go to, we have a annual meeting in that same room every year, and it's more and more every year about pollinator plants and how to incorporate some of these ideas that you guys are much more familiar with into the residential more ornamental horticulture realm. So there's definitely some room for crossover, 100%, I think.
So what makes sense for like the platform that we're talking about with this? I think we've discussed like having some sort of listserv or email list where like nurseries can exchange information, know what each other have going on each year. But whether we take that a step further and meet regularly to have more of these conversations and include practitioners if they're available and see like how we can continue this, because this is the start of the conversation, but I think there's a lot more like data that we need to collect about this. We've had like, I think surface level, like my survey got a good idea of like stem count, but I think there's so much more to it than that. That I think we need to do a lot of follow up with.
I think an interesting model to explore would be the animal feed database that the state created right after the flood for farmers that had hay and farmers that had lost all their hay. And I don't know anything about how it went, but my understanding was that they just made this database, you could put in that you had a bunch of hay or you needed a bunch of corn feed or whatever. It could be pretty simple, and I think it could just start to get everybody in the same place with a list of what is needed and what is available.
Tree Hub Marketplace.
I mean, it's similar, it's sort of more qualitative, not so quantitative, but like, I'm thinking about like the, like notes from the field and like the ag review where people just write in and say, oh, you know, like elderberry is growing great this year, it's put on 2 feet in the last month or whatever, but all my shrub willow got washed away in the last flood, you know. It'd be just really interesting to hear from other growers that, you know, on that kind of informal level.
Yeah, some wins and losses throughout the years, yeah.
Well, I mean, because nurseries are regulated by the use of agriculture, right? I mean, you might be able to actually incorporate that into the agribusiness.
Yeah.
If you spoke with the right people.
One question I have wearing my Sable River Association hat in New York, is there room here for like interstate cooperation? You know, like how it does, you know, we're all part of the Lake Champlain Basin here. We know we're all receiving funds. But how is there room here for partnership within the states? What does that look like?
Sure.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting is you're saying like the Champlain Basin program kind of often is connecting groups that are across New York and Quebec and the Champlain Basin. Then there's groups that are statewide, like ours, that are looking at the whole, all of Vermont. So like meshing those together, I think would be.
As a wetland regulator and someone who also reviews restoration plans, I would much rather see projects with native plants from New York and New Hampshire than from the Midwest. So I welcome that participation. And I think we as regulators and reviewers can play a role in navigating folks towards these local growers. We do have a very outdated called Native Plant Materials Guide book or something, and it's years old paper version that listed local plant nurseries that carry native stock, and I think it had sort of just a short bullet list of a few key species. And that is something that I'm thinking about as I'm sitting here, that we could solicit and host something like that on a very high level. And I think it's something that we're talking about here already. And I guess the other thing that I'm thinking about is that it would be useful. We're frequently directing people to either come up with their own restoration plan or providing input on plans. And we may unknowingly be pushing folks towards species that aren't readily available in the state. And so we internally could have more flexibility. And also, if we knew what is being grown and what is readily available, we could, plan plans around that. So we don't have folks reaching outside of our area to fulfill their plans. I guess that'll be my takeaway. That I'll go home and do all the stuff.
Says, yeah, 2:35, so I think we've got 10 more minutes.
Great, okay. Do we want to talk about next steps? Is this, how do we take this information and move it forward? What does that look like? Who's spearhead?
Well, I think, I'll definitely be in contact with, with all of you. I've got lots of people, I've got little stars in, my notebook, like I need to talk to so-and-so. So, I'd love to just sort of talk one-on-one with a lot of you. I think that's one step, just to sort of really have sort of confidential conversations and then, you know, at that point though, you know, I think I'm gonna really need maybe a, you know, steering committee, this advisory group or something to help. And especially for those of you who have experience with, you know, the food hub, you know, idea and how that's working. I don't have any experience with it at all. So I'm gonna need, that information. And then, you know, those of you who do funding as well, to kind of, you know, like help me brainstorm how we're going to, if we need some seed money for either contract growing situation or the, you know, just even sort of a market analysis kind of thing. I'll need input, in terms of like where I should be looking. But I feel like I'm seeing it's all kind of to some extent to kind of push this along. But I definitely, you know, if you have thoughts or, you know, any advice for me, because this is gonna be a little bit outside my comfort zone for sure, but yeah, I'm really excited to move it along.
I'd say prioritizing what is it really important, because there is limited, you know, time and for all of us and yet it sounds like there's maybe 3 or 4 things that everybody would love to know and would volunteer information for and could respect private growers versus, you know, grant funded growers. If you really prioritize that.
It also sounds like there's a lot of really short-term things that we could do, like, you know, your ideas about just having some kind of database that's available out there. That shouldn't be too hard to set up. And so I think there's a whole series of like small steps that we could take right away. We don't have to necessarily work on the big picture alone.
I would second that the database of just knowing who's out there to talk to, so we can start to make the connections individually, maybe not have a whole group, booklet and something like this.
So when we say database, are we just talking about like gathering all the information that we're all inputting into the conversation and all having access to that, or is it like a actual like software database?
I guess I was thinking more of like a listing of the different practitioners, growers, so that we have contact information to be able to reach each other and start to make.
I mean, that's super easy. Yeah, do that next week.
And maybe another short term is like making sure, which I think that you've done in the past, or like to get out there, to act as a conduit between the growers and the implementer practitioners around like, we have this many trees of this species left, anyone need them? That it might just be that like a group has a new project and like they didn't think there were gonna be trees and like, oh wait, this group has trees. So acting as that somehow getting out there, you know, maybe eventually this will be a more organized database, but like in the meantime, especially as like field season is upon us, like being able to have a way that information just gets out to your listserv that we can then share on, say, our list or whatever to get out to groups.
Yep, yeah, that seems like. And vice versa, you know, if there's groups that say, I really could use another 50 speckled alder or whatever.
Does anyone have that? Yeah.
I think as a grower, creating some kind of also subgroup of growers to bounce ideas on the other. Yeah, be really helpful in the short term, especially as some of us are starting up here.
Also, this, I don't know, if this is next step related, but just thinking about how there's more funding and support for stewardship and thinking about how that could maybe help create some consistency for potential demand over time. It probably wouldn't be on the same scale, but maybe there could be a way to start collecting lessons about what projects that are being visited again over time need to inform
to inform growers.
Yeah, that's kind of seems like a nice way to use up those 5 of this, 10 of that, and plug all the holes. But yeah, I feel like getting to reach out and need X of this size. That could be a good.
I found it really great today to see some of the examples of projects, the timelines. That's super, super helpful. I'd love to see more of that. If that, even if that's just like, an annual meeting we do, to me, that was one of the highlights of today was seeing that implementation and the actual on the ground examples and what they're, that's huge.
I think it's interesting how both sides are sort of a little bit of a black box. Like if you're planting group, the nursery side is kind of a black box and vice versa. And so the more that we can sort of share that information, just in general, just so we know what the other side is up against, I think it's really.
Yeah, I think even just what you're saying about like just logistical challenges that maybe you're getting in the way, right? Like, maybe the growers not providing like a list of what's available in the time when implementers are needing to make choices about that, right? Or that information's not happening at the right time. And so if the timing isn't right, maybe that order is going elsewhere because that's when that order needs to happen, right? So just in terms of understanding everyone else's timing issues.
Yeah, because I think, like, I know that with the Intervale, you had said that, when you and I were talking, that it'd be really nice if Intervale knew, like, even if it was just the summer before the tree order goes in, that, the group it's planning on planting 2 acres and it's gonna need 800 trees and, it would just be good for you to know that. Not necessarily what species and what tree, but at the same time, the group, planting groups often need to know what trees are gonna be available until, I don't know, when you put it out, November or something. And so then it's like, okay, how am I gonna, like, I gotta fill out this tree order really fast because I gotta get it in. And, there's that sort of, I always felt like I had to get it right back to you in order to grab the trees that, that spend species that I wanted. And so it feels like it goes both ways, that there's sort of this period of time that there's something, where there's a lack of communication and knowledge.
And if you have any projects that are hung up or slower, then they maybe miss the boat on material and again.
So even if it would be useful for growers to have a list of could produce by species I could grow for 2026, or like species I will have in 20, not like what I have this spring, but what I will have this spring, but also what I will have the next spring or by the fall, or to be able to project out, or could have if asked, right?
There's a fair amount of consistency though from year to year. I don't think the planting groups are, I mean, maybe I'm different than everyone else, but I don't think, there's sort of a standard species that do pretty well in most places. And that, I like speckled alder. I know that, I can plant speckled alder in most places and it's gonna do fine, and then it's appropriate for a lot of different states. So it seems to me that there's sort of this, that, I could work with Katie and we could come up with, and Chris, and we could come up with, here's some that we just always need every year. And the thing is that sometimes those aren't the ones that are easy to grow. So I think that's another issue, is that the ones that planting groups like and that tend to do well in the field aren't necessarily the ones that are easy and profitable.
Need 2 lists. Yeah, it sounds like conversations are the biggest thing that needs to come out of this. More and more conversations. And that can start all the way with Steve too, I feel like. So that's much bigger in the timeline. Again, that's another couple of years of everything. But yeah, thanks so much everyone for coming here. I feel like it was really valuable. And I hope everyone else feels the same way. There's a lot to go from here, but I think for the get it started. Maybe follow up with like
group email to see who's interested in moving forward with the conversation, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, that's something, yeah, I mean, we can, you know, I'll need feedback from you guys, and I know it's gonna be, you know, we're just starting the busy season, but, I think it's worthwhile, I hope it's worthwhile to you to not disappear from me. And because I'm gonna, you know, I'm not gonna be able to get this by myself, so, I'll need lots of. Okay, thank you. We have another break until 3:00. At 3, there'll be 2 different sessions. One will be, basically, you know, centered around monitoring, how we monitor the success of projects. That's something we don't have a lot of funding for either, and so that's another conversation. And then the other is landowner outreach, and I think they're both gonna be really good presentations. You're gonna wanna see both, so we gotta decide. One will be in this room, I think we have the monitoring here, and then on the other side, just right across the hall is the landowner outreach. But we've got healthy.
That's super interesting to like hear what, I was talking to Shawn for a minute also. Like, what? It's not there to be. It's hard to just take on that.
Good.
So many great people. Yeah, you guys are very well. My name is Chris Stemnick. I work with Shawn with Lake Champlain Secret, and I am here just to introduce our speakers for this session. Shawn gave me a little script to read to you all. So this is the monitoring methods and results room. If you don't want this one, press the ball, ready to go. Unfortunately, while Watershed Forestry Partnership organizations plant thousands of trees each year, they often lack funding and capacity to do careful monitoring of tree survival post-planting. Vermont Fish and Wildlife has been able to do some of that, however, and Sam Puddicombe, currently one of the Friends of Winooski's new project managers, and Eldridge, I think, are going to tell us about 3 years of monitoring that the 2 of them have done on Vermont Fish and Wildlife managed ANR lands. So I'll turn it over to the 2 of you.
Yeah, so that is pretty much the introduction. So yeah, I work with Friends for the Misty now, but Will and I made this presentation last fall while I was working with Will. And this is really his project. So it's 3 years of monitoring on 15 different sites for tree plantings. There was a lot of things that were measured, but this presentation is just going over mortality and natural regeneration as the category of 3 different variables, which were some pre-planting conditions, some planting conditions, and some post-planting conditions. But yeah, we're really going to be focused more on the monitoring aspect of this rather than the results aspect, because Kim Kane actually kind of went over a lot of the same results that we got, which is great to have those things be reinforced. This is just a bit more of the quantitative data that we were able to collect on some of those aspects of mortality and natural regeneration that we see in riparian plantings. And so I'm going to just give the spark notes of this presentation, and then we're going to try and facilitate a discussion regarding how we can monitor and what are the benefits of doing it and what is difficult to do it, and maybe how Fish and Wildlife could help us out with being able to do that with our sites in the future. So yeah, this is the larger point of the presentation, but why are we monitoring? I think as a group of people, we all are trying to get trees into the ground in various capacities. And sometimes we're required to monitor by our funders, but what is the benefit of really like going above and beyond and trying to do more in-depth monitoring? And really, I think we all have a lot of like anecdotal evidence for things that have worked for us in the past, and we're kind of running with that, and that's been informing like a lot of our different planting decisions. But in what way can we actually have some quantitative data to say what is working and what's not working for preparing plantings? So in terms of this project, there's 15 different sites across the state of Vermont on different ANR lands. They range from being pretty small to 8 acres. They were planted from 2018 to 2021. But the actual experimental aspect of this project didn't start until 2019, which I think will talk about. And we monitored them from 0 to 5 years since they were planted. And there was 81 plots that, across the 15 sites. Some of the sites had only 1 plot, some of them had 20, some of the plots were smaller at a 20 by 20 scale, some of them were 200 by 100 feet. So all this to say is there is an incredible amount of variability in our planting sites and the size of how we monitored them. So what data did we collect? So each tree had its individual ID. And every time we went out, we tried to also collect what species it was and its height to the best of the collector's ability. Another, crucial part about monitoring is how well you can identify those. And then we also looked at vigor. So how vigorous a tree was whether vigorous accounted for whether it was healthy and alive. Not vigorous was whether it was alive, probably not going to make it. And dead and not found were kind of equated to be the same thing. And then we also marked its origin. So whether it was a planted stem or whether that stem was naturally regenerated. We also had a section for comments or photos, to try and maybe identify how things died. So that would have been a comment for beaker browse in the bottom left. We also had data that was collected for the plot level. Will was really interested at looking at thatch cover specifically. I'm trying to see if that affected natural regeneration. So we logged what % of the plot was covered by thatch and that thatch depth. So like sort of that organic grassy material. And then we also made note for if there was any problematic species around, like knotweed, and what what seed trees were within the plot area. Okay, so the variables that we were measuring these things against. So the first thing was pre-planting conditions, and this is essentially saying what was the site before we got there. And we categorized these into high disturbance areas and low disturbance areas. So this is very similar to what Katie Kane was talking about. And an example of a high disturbance area would be something like a cornfield, and a low disturbance area would be something like a hayfield. And our pre-planting conditions also vary within the site itself. So different plots could have different pre-planting conditions. Here's some examples of some highly disturbed areas, and here's some example of some low disturbed areas. So we also looked at the conditions while we were planting. So that's like what type of stem did we plant, whether that was a bare root, a live stake, how did we space it, who was doing the planting, and at what density did we plant. And then we also looked at post-planting conditions, which just were, did we put exclusion fencing around it? And then did we go back to do spot herbicide treatments every 2 years? And so now the metrics for how we judge those. So we looked at the mortality, and this was just of the planted stems. And so here's our first graph, and something that you're going to notice about all of our graphs is that we have these really large error bars showing that we have a large standard deviation. I'm saying that there was a lot of variability within the results of our data. And we're going to call that variability patchiness within our results, which I think is a key idea when we're talking about how these plantings are doing overall, which is that, in some areas they do really well, in some areas they don't. And that's reflected in these standard deviations when we have these summarized graphs. But very similar to what Katie Kane saw, I think she actually had like a 75% survival in year 3. And so a 25% mortality in our 3rd year is very on par for the averages that she saw. So about a 10% increase in mortality per year. I'm going to skip over this graph. This is all of the pre-planting conditions, and I'm going to show you the summary graph, which is again reflecting what Katie Kane saw. in which an area with lower disturbance had a higher mortality than areas of high disturbance. And I also have just the hay corn example, which is sort of like the classic, high disturbance versus low disturbance area. And it's also sort of the most robust data sets that we had. So you can see that hayfields had a much higher mortality. I'm going to kind of breeze through the next two examples of planting and post-planting conditions, because it's all sort of what we found was that there isn't actually that much of a significant difference in the mortality between things like live stakes or who planted them, which is actually a pretty significant finding in saying that it didn't seem to make that much of a difference for us. And yeah, so same thing for how we cluster the trees, the density of the trees, and then again with the post-planting maintenance of herbicide or exposures, it didn't really seem to make that much of a significant difference for us regarding mortality. And then in terms of natural regeneration, we saw natural regeneration go up through the years, up until our third year. We actually saw 300 naturally regenerated stems per acre, which is pretty impressive considering we're planting for 400 stems per acre usually. So to see that within natural regeneration alone is pretty impressive. Again, summarizing the pre-planting conditions, we can see that there was a really high natural regeneration with those highly disturbed areas and a really low natural regeneration with those low disturbed areas, again, reflected in what we saw in Katie Kane's presentation, but just with some quantitative data. And same thing regarding those planting and post-planting conditions where it did not seem incredibly significant, except for this graph actually, where it definitely seemed like herbicide did not benefit our natural regeneration, which kind of makes sense if you're thinking about herbicide drift affecting, the small seedlings that are trying to come up. And maybe, we can talk about that, but the last metric we had was just overall density of both planted and naturally generated stems. And you can see that our overall density did go up over time. And so I'm going to break down this graph a little bit further. So this is both naturally generated stems and planted stems. But if you look just at the planted stems, you can see that it goes up till 2021, which is when we stopped planting. And then after 2021, we basically weren't replacing the stems at the rate that they were dying. And then to break this graph down one more time to show you the variability in our data set, this is what that graph was summarized of. So not necessarily like peer-reviewed level of research, but it is helpful to see what we're trying to summarize and what we're trying to say with how variable this data can be. So yeah, some takeaways from this study is that there was definitely like a higher level of disturbance, or the higher level of disturbance had a better natural regeneration along with less mortality over low disturbance, and that there was a huge variation within what we found for natural regeneration. So that was very patchy based upon those big standard deviations, and that we didn't find a lot of increased mortality when it came to like things like bare root versus live stakes, or volunteers versus professional plantings, which is to say, those are pretty viable options that shouldn't be ruled out. Yeah, so now I want to bring Will up and we can talk about the process of doing all this monitoring and what he thought the benefit was and the challenges of it were.
So to kind of summarize or repeat a little bit of what Sam said. So key takeaways, planting in hayfields is hard. Sort of restoring those areas. But the other areas we found were actually, it didn't really matter really what the conditions were. Didn't really matter who was doing the planting or what kind of plants we were using. So in terms of like take-home messages for people out there doing the practice, there's planting is kind of, it's forgivable, you know, there's a lot of forgiveness sometimes in terms of how you do it. The other key is that we threw everything, I don't know if it's obvious from Lloyd, but you know, we tested density. So we were doing 400 stems per acre. We were doing up to 1,700 stems per acre, right? You know, we're throwing everything out here. We're doing exposures. We're doing herbicide treatment. We had some sites where we had a berm. So we're like, you know, there's cornfield and then there's what we're doing, which is basically just like totally clearing everything. But anyway, so the key is that, you know, the Fish and Wildlife Department, we have the capacity to do this. We have the land that we can do this on, and we have the resources, basically, Sam, to go out and monitor this type of work. All right. And I recognize that a lot of groups don't have that capacity. So what I want to do is have a discussion about what well, this is up to you guys. What would be more valuable? So we can talk about types of experiments. What are the information needs that you guys, the people doing the planting, have? Like what don't you know? Like what are you like wondering about? In particular, like hay fields, like what are strategies we can do? You know, how can we improve buffering and restoration on hay fields? And then or particularly we can go into monitoring, like how do you monitor a tree plant, a restoration project? That's something that we've obviously thought a lot about. We're fortunate to have Pete in the room as well. And so Pete also works with Fish and Wildlife Department, and he's intimately involved in a lot of the direct seeding. So like the you know, with the hay fields, and has doing a lot of the work in the converting hay fields like back into cornfields. Can I call it and say that? Anyway, basically he saw what happens on cornfields, how they just blossom with trees. And so he was like, what if we just took this hay field, turned it into a cornfield, and then planted, and then seeded it. And so anyway, but yeah, any questions about or anything?
Did you monitor individual species survival? Data on that?
Yeah, so there's a large spreadsheet in which we could try and pull out a lot of other information. As you can notice, there was only mortality and natural regeneration as a function of those conditions we talked about, but Will's got the spreadsheet. I mean, he's like, but yeah, that's definitely something that's why that data was collected, you know, so. Yeah, I don't know the report Katie's is on there too. What in terms of species survival, do you have anything? Any advice or any thoughts about tree species?
That's a really broad question. What species are doing the best?
Well, I don't know.
Was survival noticeably different between different tree species?
I don't remember how this ends. I did not go into that. We had like thousands of trees. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on average, I'd say looking at our projects over like the last 15 years, yes, they're like clear winners and clear losers. And now we're trying to, you know, just focus on the winners. So I think in terms of, I can only speak for the projects I'm involved with, like, I think we're not seeing as much discrepancy in survival, because we're paying more attention to what's doing well. But I'd love to hear if you have time to dig into it at some point, Will, if you saw certain trends.
Yeah, no, I will. I will say, just from a natural regeneration standpoint, we generally only see like one, maybe three species when we do get natural regeneration. So box elder is a big one, particularly in hay fields. I think the seeds are just able to survive and kind of penetrate through that thatch, which is why I was really interested in that. And then we're also seeing locust, black locust.
Oh, wow.
On some of our sites, particularly the southern part of the state. And
Green ash.
yeah, ash. Yeah. What I'm really curious about is after the floods that we had last year, particularly like in Winooski, if we're going to see, what we're going to see pop out of that. Yeah.
We see quite a bit of cottonwood coming on the other sides.
Yeah. 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 But no, so Katie, I'm glad you're here because I feel like between the department and the service, like, we have the capacity to do these kind of research projects. And so, you guys have questions, yeah.
A quick one, anything around like date of planting or spring versus fall? I think anecdotally, I hear that spring is better.
Most of ours are spring. We did a handful of fall ones we did were more live stakes. We were doing like willow stakes in the grubbing. So that's something else we've done is like riprap banks, throwing some dirt over it and then jamming some live stakes in there. So that data's in there as well. But those we did in the fall, I don't have anything specific. Katie, if you look more at the fall, like that was, I know back.
Yeah, so I'd say same for us. Most of our projects are planted in the spring and then some live stage work in the fall. And part of that is, I mean, the weather gets really tight in the fall between when material's dormant and can be harvested. And then you could be planting in it for the snow. So it's hard to plan bigger projects in the fall because of that.
I don't know if Shawn is here, but I know that that's something that when I was talking about sort of like the capacity aspect of monitoring, that a lot of people do sort of write off fall plantings, but there's not necessarily, like, there's like certainly an inconvenience factor that's very valid, but in terms of the survivability, it seems like that is like a lot of just anecdotal evidence, and so that would be something that I think could potentially be a useful thing for monitoring, to be able to say, yes, it is, or no, it's not. I think that's.
Well, because I think our palette is so was truncated, like we can't get the species we necessarily want.
Sure. I'm curious, how many people in here that plant trees are able to go back and do any monitoring at all? Yeah, all right, and what are you guys looking at?
Yeah.
Or
We're counting species and then we, depending upon the site, if it's a small site, we will count which species are surviving and not just overall. At some of the larger ones, it just takes way too much time to do that. And so we'll make some notes about like these species in general are doing well, these species are not doing well. We also have, in addition to just counting which ones are surviving and which ones are not, we've set up some categories like, is it thriving? Is it just surviving? Is it dead? We're also counting if it had died, but then sprouted again, which is what we found with a number of plantings that happened. And that's generally what we keep track of.
and where do you live?
I'm with the Franklin County NRCD.
Oh, okay. All right, anybody else? Yeah.
Then that's the limited NLUP program. We're required to every 2 years for 10 years. And we have permanent plots and in representative areas that do a full species count and percentages.
So are you like tagging trees and everything?
No, we just have permanent plots. We have the center of the plot and then we go out certain distance.
We did that and I was like, oh my God. Maybe if you're doing it, but you know, if I'm sending a seasonal, no offense.
Well, we also have only one big site, so it's 150 acres or so, and we focus on the restored areas. So we're kind of a little bit of a different case, but 2 people for a week every other year or so.
What about Brad? Do you study whether or not they have been browsed on?
Good question. I just observing. Definitely depends on the site. There definitely are deer out there. Our new one that we're planning for now is I see deer, many deer when I go out there, so I think it's gonna be more of a problem. But we also have a little bit more funding because it's through a regulatory system. So we're gonna start doing fencing in some areas where it's an issue. Probably moving fencing around to different areas.
Yeah, we've started looking at browse, whether it's rodent or deer, and just noting that if it's happening and if it was a conflict, if we can tell if it was a cause of death. So we have a sheet that we've developed. Which is just like tally by species and by sort of how much is thriving. And then also if there's a browse issue. Yeah, I think it's helpful just because then you know how to respond.
Yeah.
I have a question though too, like, did you guys look at whether an area was like mowed or like grass was cut around the trees? Cause I just see that as like a major issue or like bindweed that's like holding a tree down. And if you go in and like release it, then it pops back up and otherwise it might just get not survive.
We don't do that. So it's like, I mean, we're kind of in that, what Katie's talking about, where you plant it and walk away.
Yeah.
For the most part, other than like the spot spraying. Yeah, we're not really like going in afterwards. Because, yeah, there's too many.
Yeah, I'd just be really interested in data on that because it's obviously a huge amount of time and resources and effort, but it seems to be really effective.
And we did that at Rando, on, just was there and planted a lot of those trees and we actually paint them with sand paint. And then we, what else did we have? But
You had the cages for a while too. And then I think that's when you switched to the sand bait because they got too big.
yeah,
But yeah, other than when we're out in the field and pulling some of the bindweed off, if we see them, like that's about the extent, because we are out there a lot.
Yeah.
So, we-
And it's kind of controversial, but we plant in rows and we do mow regularly for that reason. Weed and any reed canary grass that might still be coming up and
I like to plant in rows, but it's mostly for monitoring.
yeah, it's good for some reason. It doesn't look nice.
No.
But it has many benefits.
I mean, this is a smaller scale, but we just hand site usually very quickly around all the trees and shrubs the first 2 years. And then also bigger is another criteria, just a rating bigger.
And what, is the monitoring you're doing, do you feel like it's, are you using it just for more like to meet a funding objective, or is it actually informing your practices, like what you do going forward? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
For us, definitely, because adaptive management is part of it. So more planting, invasive control if needed, straightening tree tubes. We're gonna do this year with the ACC and
We're mostly. Sure. We're mostly out there to be doing the maintenance piece of it and doing the string trimming and pulling off the bindweed and all of that. And so then the monitoring is kind of just like the last hour as we're finishing that up. And it is for a grant deliverable that we're counting that information. But the primary reason we're out there visiting those sites multiple times each summer in the years after they're planted is for the maintenance piece.
We wrote maintenance into our grant, usually takes longer than is written in, but we're gathering other data parameters and we just found over the years, it makes a lot of sense because then other data is more robust.
I was gonna say, we don't have like robust quantitative data, but we do go back to a lot of the sites that we work at, and some of them have ongoing maintenance. We're in a lovely dialogue with Knotweed out in the valley, and we've been doing a mowed strip between the bank knotweed and the plantings that we're doing for public restoration, and that's our sort of weed site. We've been doing that for 8 or 9 years, something like that. And so we started to take that management strategy to other sites that we can settle, so continue to qualitatively monitor them.
Are there any sites that you feel like don't, like you mentioned knotweed obviously, but others like where you're like, oh my God, it's impossible to get trees established here, whereas this site is like, they grow themselves basically, I guess I'm just curious, like, ultimately what I'm trying to find out is like, where, how can we help you guys, learn more about tree planting, make restoration more successful?
So, I mean, for us, like clay soils have been particularly challenging to plant on. Like you seem to have less success on clay soils.
Water.
As the county. Nice, so I guess we're trying,
Yeah.
we're finding some trees that do well in that soil type, but like. Other ones that can be better. So that'd be something that we would like to dig into is. How to be better on those soils.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, Iceberg. Yeah, there you go. We're doing that. We got some land there. Yeah, like, Audubon, Vermont is doing some of their cluster planting, their bird habitat cluster plantings on one of Creek WMA or.
But we also want the deer resistance
Yeah,
and too.
well, they're doing clusters but with fencing around them. That style seems to work well, so that we also try to test that. For deer, because we had Otter Creek WMA down in Mount Favorite. Yeah, we had trees that we had no protections on and they got totally drought and they're like this tall. We had ones that we planted in clusters, with fences around them, and the silver maple, they're like 10 feet tall after like 3 years. So it's not ideal. It's more like I said, it's more bird habitat. It's not forest, so I'm really curious what it's gonna look like. And we're not seeing any natural regeneration in there. We didn't do any site prep on that one, but anyway, cool. Yes.
So we had funding starting from last year from WUB to go out and assess all of our planting sites that we had planted using DEC funds. And so we assessed all those sites and now we can do stewardship work on those sites through the summers. But we only started using DEC funds relatively recently. So we have probably 10 years of planting sites that we funded through other funding sources that we weren't able to go back to because the DEC funds can only be used on DEC funded sites. And even we have a huge, more recent site that the landowner didn't want to work with state funding, so we can't include that either. And although we did kind of a comprehensive assessment of the DEC site, we haven't been keeping like a database of, all the different factors. So we kind of have been learning, but it's almost like anecdotal within our own organization and not systematic. So we definitely could use help going back through, the 2002 through 2018 or something sites and seeing what those look like.
So you're saying funding to go back and do research or monitor on those things? Does the federal government have funding for monitoring? You guys are planning. Yeah.
Yeah, monitor our own projects.
Yeah.
Michelle, would those be, are the 2002 to 2018 DEC funded or outside of that?
Outside of that, like basin program funding, Vermont Community Foundation, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think, the reason they go back, so what Katie, I message that, yes, eventually these sites will turn into forest, but I guess I'm just so worried about them not filling into forest. Yes.
They really will.
Yeah, some of them don't.
And so
They need more.
I think going back, so anyway. So maybe, I don't know if you're gonna look into it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I also have a question, like, how you're thinking about continuing this monitoring with, because I would imagine that the first 5 years are really critical for establishment, and this time period occurred during a pretty significant drought. Like, so I don't know if there's other data, moving forward or looking for 2018 to kind of see if that mortality changes.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. And yes, I think what we would do, so what I've heard, this is anecdotal, but is that the first 3 years are kind of, it's like first year sleep, second year, third year, like whatever. It takes 3 years, and that's kind of like after that, kind of set, although maybe not. But anyway, and then I was gonna go back every 5 years after that. So first 3 years are kind of more intense. That being said, I'm really, like I said, I'm really curious about the flood this year. This is kind of a unique event, but there's a potential for natural regeneration, so you have sites that maybe were Root Canary, but now they're under a foot of silt or something, right? Which could create a whole new landscape, right? It could like be on a cornfield, although it's not. But to create that soil basically, and bring in seeds. Either seeds get carried in or they get the dispersal. But the thing I'm really worried about is the knotweed that gets transported with all that. And so getting out there and actually like mapping it and then pulling, how do we get rid of all that? Because right now is the time to do it. We have like 18 months. Is that what I said? Yeah, before the rhizome, the rhizomes will grow, but they really get established in 18 months. Like after that, like, I think that's another kind of, but right now it's still handful.
I would just add, thank you, Michelle, for bringing it up, but like as Christian was talking about earlier, with my WUG hat on, we're excited that a lot of the funding for plantings does include funding for maintenance and monitoring now. That wasn't always the case. So if you're feeling like that's not an option, ask us. We can probably find one.
Yeah, I had a question about Sam did a good job pointing out the variance through the standard deviation, and I just worry about making any claims from data that's super whether the variance is very high. It's statistically significant, but it's a lot of variance. So in terms of getting rid of that, how are you thinking about doing that? It sounds like we're planting trees every year constantly, so there's a lot of data out there potentially.
Right.
So how do we get that into your models?
Yeah, if you want all our data.
Awesome. No, I think that's exactly the point, is what is the source of that variability? So it's patchy, that's what the data is showing. So natural regeneration is patchy, tree survival is patchy, but now we're trying to figure out why. What we understand, is there a mechanism to underlie that, or is it random? And
Well,
so-
I think it's patchy though based on what, 82 plots?
Yeah.
So I'm curious if it was 1,000 plots, is it still patchy?
I don't, but there's some things that we've seen coming out. So like hay fields, they're gonna have lower survival than a cornfield, right? So we're beginning to tease apart some of that variability. So we broke it down into pre-planting conditions. So what's the site before it got planted? How was it planted? And then any maintenance afterward.
I need to learn. You need to teach me that. I've never learned. Thank you for coming to the last session. I already feel like I've learned so much and heard so many ideas and really great responses and great thinking going on. I feel like I'm almost full. I don't know if you feel that way. But I'm going to ask for even more input, and I'm going to try to absorb as much as I can. Basically, I want to know from you where this partnership should go. And the Nursery Roundtable discussion this afternoon, which there's lots of ideas that got generated. I feel like I've got I've got lots of marching orders already. But I still want input from the entire group in terms of what else what I should be thinking of, what would be most useful, and how the partnership itself wants to continue, how we want to work together, anything that, how we can best support the work that we're all doing. I will tell you that my position has sort of, the job description that I have includes facilitating exchange of best practices among practitioners. So that's kind of what we're doing here to some extent is starting to talk about how do we do these projects? How do we improve them? To also address barriers that we're running across, and we all know that there's a lot of those. Just general promotion of restoration projects, specific, sort of with an emphasis on riparian forests, but also sustainable forest management. And then to address research needs. So those are sort of the big categories that I was gleaning from the description of my role. But that doesn't, I want to know, we don't have to limit it to this, I don't think. So it just gets on, get input. I've got ideas about what I think I should do under each of those categories, but I'm hoping to get input from you. And I think, address barriers, the nursery discussion, I think we talked a lot about a lot of the barriers that the nurseries are faced with. And so I think I've got enough of that. If there's lingering ideas, you should certainly mention those, but in other, I would say just the groups as a whole can start to sort of let me know what you're thinking in terms of how, what we want out of this. So I'm going to leave it open and see if anybody agrees with you. Otherwise, I'll start telling you what my ideas are. We can start with exchange of best practices. Do groups feel like they need more information? Like, would it, one thing that Allison Adams worked on was a riparian guidance, riparian planting guidance document, and that's almost done. And so I probably will go ahead and finish that up, but I'm curious to know whether that kind of thing is useful. Yes, okay.
Yeah,
so
I think it is, but I'm just gonna say.
Yeah.
Like, more exchange of specific case studies between groups, but particularly in ways that are like palatable and understandable to landowners and the general. Like, I think it can be really helpful so we can sort of showcase the work that we're doing to generate.
And so what does that look like when you say case studies? Is that a brochure that has pictures or?
It could be all sorts of media materials.
Right, yeah,
something
on a website.
It could be a web page, it could be
Right,
a
yeah.
video, it could be something, written, it could be a traveling roadshow.
Okay. So this would be specifically for landowners, for you to be, for groups to be able to show land.
Yeah.
So sort of like, here's what you should expect.
I think we just often talk to each other and tell each other about all the great work that we're doing.
Yeah,
And, you know,
yeah,
make some
yeah.
comments, it's all good, but there's like the rest of the state that, could be brought along.
Yeah.
More with this.
Okay.
I mean, the photos we saw earlier today, those are pretty powerful as far as showing examples. of What can happen.
Right.
At one time.
Yes, yeah, right. Yeah, those were, the pictures Katie showed are, really, not all of them look like that. Okay. Yeah, John.
I'd say, if you could get information out about the economics of doing this work versus not doing it, there is a cost there. They're paying that cost already. What's the benefit of doing the work?
So you're talking about the landowners, that, so, and the cost is a bank that's.
Yeah.
That's, or lack of, so you're thinking of like a monetary.
Yes.
Benefit.
Yeah.
Okay, so, not sure what that would look like, but,
Ecosystem servicing.
yeah, right, or let's see, I'm not sure. what you call it.
Any good risk analysis person could do it for you.
Yeah. Okay. Cost analysis, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'll say just plus or minus, so with and without the restorations, yeah.
We were just talking about like sharing kind of innovative practices, like what's working, what's not in terms of planting success. Talking to Ellen and Lindsay about, like water being the factor and like, is it, what techniques are people using to make sure that we are having improved survivorship outcomes and like ways that we can exchange that information more readily.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're asking, really sort of a way to exchange information,
On best practices.
Right, yeah, so basically this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly, the whole thing, but like, how do we get that information
Yeah,
across?
right,
People
yeah,
are sharing that.
You share.
The successes, what are people trying?
I'll just say sort of like group to group knowledge or something and experience.
I think a good example of that is like a couple years ago, Katie King sent out an email about biodegradable flagging. Does anyone else remember that? That email was forwarded to me like 6 times. Biodegradable flagging was just not biodegrading quickly enough. And yeah, exactly. And like that kind of thing, I think is just so helpful to share really quickly. Like everybody just changed what they were doing immediately.
Yeah. So would that be like a listserv that's just kind of, people just sort of throw out information like, it would not be very, then I could maybe sort of glean bits and sort of start to keep best practices, current understanding of best practices or something like that. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. Obviously there's, I feel like we're all, doing our projects and we don't necessarily even go to other people's projects. We don't know what everyone else is doing. We kind of assume that we're all doing the same thing, but I kind of wonder if we did do that, if we were able to virtually somehow be part of each other's projects, that we know a little bit more about how other people are doing and, maybe we learn things.
Yeah, I was gonna say the listserv seems like a great idea for, the quick dispersal of information, but just running with the idea of having like a more permanent resource like established, so you can use it as like a consistent reference material, but that it also may be, referenced who would be the best contact for, advice on it. So being like, this practice is heavily done by this group, and then, it's a small community so that you can still reach out to them.
That's a great idea. And, maybe this riparian restoration guidance document could house some of the, it could be just constantly updated in terms of, don't use, whatever you do, don't use biodegradable, flagging or whatever. Something like that, that there's just sort of a constant document to be referred back to.
Just one question and then comment. There is a listserv already, correct?
Well, there's the watershed.
Okay, are we thinking of a different listserv?
Well, that's a good question. So, do we want lots of different little bitty lists? Working one, yeah. So maybe the thing to do is to start using that, we found that if we did this before we planted the trees, that was, anytime that you find something that's working for you, that you put it out there.
And just like follow-up comment, I think this is a great venue to level set on what we're doing and like just comparing like Will and Sam's presentation on monitoring, and that protocol was different than US Fish and Wildlife's monitoring protocol. And yeah, maybe we don't need a standardized one, but at least some communications about how we're going to define health across different species. So I think it's a great platform to sort of share and have those level set on those type of things.
Right. Yeah.
So last week at the Watershed Group WAV meeting, when we brought up the whole listserv thing, other people, and I'm saying this like knowing nothing, but suggesting what people said last week, which is that sometimes a listserv is tricky because it's like just information out, right? And you can't have threads. And there are things out there that I don't know very much about, but like Slack, that where you can organize conversations and you might be able to have like growers I'm really saying this without knowledge, but
Yeah.
I think there's. And like, people were saying this at the WEF meeting and I mean, so we could meet Shawn.
Okay.
Maybe we could like get on the thing, but I don't know what other people's experiences are, but like something like that, more effective than like a listserv.
And then you could search a keyword and say, here's everything that's it about flagging too.
The Vegetable and Berry Growers Association has a good list there that has a set of guidelines that when they're followed, I think work really well. And like, one of them is, people will ask a question like, what do you use for flagging tape? And then they get 10 responses and then they send another follow-up email that's like, here's what people said, sort of compiled, bad, good.
Okay,
And
wow,
it-
okay. And you said this is vegetable.
my Vegetable and Berry Growers,
Okay.
UVM extension runs it.
Okay.
The guidelines are posted somewhere and they're works really well. Yeah.
It's a searchable archive too, right?
Yeah.
So like you could search a keyword and find the year's worth of things in that.
And it's a lot of things for sale and people will provide things.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of groups like this, do like coffee hours or some type of informal, like monthly thing where like whoever's organizing it, and I'm imagining that might be you, Shawn. Like, it doesn't put a lot of organization on your plate. Everybody knows informally, we meet on the third Friday of the month. And like, bring whatever you have that's working, what's not, best practices. And you kind of have that opportunity to do a Q&A. So it definitely doesn't achieve the goal of an archive where you can go back and search for it, but it does create that discussion forum.
Yeah, I'm sure that not everybody would be able to come once every month, but I wonder, even if it was just once a year, do we had sub meetings, like all the people who want to just talk about, the nitty gritty of doing riparian restoration? You know, if they're from the planting perspective, or just the nursery folks wanting to get together. Would that make sense to do something like that? Because I kind of feel like if we did an every month kind of thing, there'd be very few people showing up, and it feels like it would be taxing in terms of staff time. Not, I'm very sensitive that most groups don't have a lot of staff time. That's not, if it's not, doesn't fall right under a grant, that it's hard to put that time into things like that. So a yearly thing where we kind of have sub meetings.
Another thing from the vegetable world that I think works pretty well is they have like, I think it's extension, but there's sort of twilight meetings where maybe 3 or 4 times over the summer, there's a meeting at the farm. And it's talking about high tunnel peaches or strawberries or something. Like, you could do one at an Intervale conservation nursery, you could host a propagation one. Or you could go to a planting and you could talk about flagging or tree tapes.
Yeah.
But it's a confuse people to see face to face and to see what's working in the field.
The Nursery and Landscape Association does a very similar thing. They happen a few times during the summer, they call them twilight meetings, and it's one organization will host and just kind of show off what they're doing. And it always just turns into more exchange of good ideas. But it's very informal. The idea is, I think, to not have it be such a burden on so
At least you can distribute those around the state to some extent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yes. People are driving 2 hours to do a 1 hour meeting.
I don't know how helpful it is for everyone in the group, but from the last the wood turtle project, it got me thinking about outreach and how certain groups are resistant to the outreach that maybe a conservation group does, or if they're from the state or something. And I don't know if it'd be helpful to facilitate those best management or those best practices for, you're trying to approach a landowner and you want to plant a 35-foot buffer, you're taking out some of their land. Because clearly some strategies work and others are time consuming.
Yeah, how often are people like reinventing the wheel in their own organization when maybe that's already been solved 15 times? Yeah.
I'm sure that. And then there's staff turnover too, and so then the new staff has to.
That was the other one I was gonna say was training. like, it'd be great if there was a once a year training that maybe not everyone here goes to, because some people here are like veterans of this work, but our staffs do experience high turnover. And a lot of times in organizations like ours, there might be one individual who's responsible for planning and implementing riparian buffer plannings, and that person might be new. And so if there was a training, we could send them to. And they could implement planting with a partner as part of that, and then you get the benefit of some free labor.
That's another thing. I mean, I can almost imagine almost like an apprentice. If somebody's planting and, and if, let everyone know and say, we would love to have somebody just come and, help us manage the volunteers so you can see how we do it or whatever. I mean, I don't know if that would be useful, but just that the Watershed Forestry Partnership listserv might be a good way to say, we're doing this and we're doing, or we're trying out this new practice, this new site prep or whatever. I'm gonna take a look. I don't know, something, if, that might be one way to have us train each other. But yeah, I like the idea too. And I can sort of start to put out feelers for what formal trainings might be useful.
And feedback for funders, it would be really cool if our agreements included some amount of funded time to do that. Otherwise, it's, it's a challenge.
Watershed, has had trainings and, even train the trainer kind of grants and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, we used to have, DEC used to have a train the trainer grant, and we had a woody buffer, like a riparian buffer, train the trainer grant, and it was exactly that. Like we got, it was Hillary from Holy Meadowy and Mary and Greg Rest from White River Partnership. We hosted a big meeting, and then we sent people out to plantings to help build.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so something like that would be such a good opportunity to help train, because as we've been talking about, like there's also gaps there's new staff, and then there's also gaps in the state where groups just there isn't a group that's really actively working on planting. So I like that idea.
When like the organizational capacity block grant could be a.
Yeah, could be, absolutely. Yeah, trainings can be part of that.
Funding opportunities currently.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lindsay, did you have?
I sort of piggybacking on what Corey said about, communicating opportunities for learning. I was just thinking about what Lynn used to send out and what Toby now sends out to the Watershed group weekly, and I'm sure it takes a lot of Toby's time, but it's a notification of this is what's happening, this is what's upcoming. And I wonder if maybe as we're all moving into planting season, that could be something that I'm not asking you to do this weekly or monthly or anything, but like one time a year, like, hey, this is what groups around the state, if we wanted to share that information, like for instance, Franklin County Conservation District has sent out to our local partners, like, we have our planting dates planned. If you have any volunteers or capacity within your staff, we use help. So I don't know if that's something that you send out to the list or if we sent you information.
Yeah.
One thing that would make that, as a person who helps compile that information, if there was a standardized format that people could sort of fill in, like, this is what's happened, this is what our group's doing, this is the date, this is what we need. That would make it easier to compile that information.
This is just an observation, but I think like part of why the nursery conversation and seed propagation conversation was so rich was because there were a lot of people in the rooms from all different parts of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so like just thinking that part of this isn't just about best practices, but also kind of like the whole community of practice. And so making sure that we don't end up creating silos that don't help move the ball forward at the end.
Yeah, so just promoting that whole, this group continuing to have conversations with each other. I think that's great. And, it's the listserv on the one hand, I mean, that to me, that seems like one way to sort of hopefully kind of do that. But I know that sometimes when you're busy, the listserv post comes up and it's one of the first things you skip because you know that it's not going to be anything that's that you have to attend to right that moment. You've got landowners that you need to contact or tree orders you need to follow up on or whatever it is. And there's only a certain number of hours in the day. So, but I still
we'd really like to, make sure that we're all, we're not just talking once a year. And, yeah, you have like.
Well, I was gonna ask a question. Allison was doing a newsletter where she was
Yeah.
pulling in information from all of you and then putting together a newsletter. I'm not sure if that would be something that people would still find valuable that Shawn could do or not. Or people even remember it.
Yeah, I think it was just, when Allison was doing it, I think it was just twice a year. But at least that's sort of a touch point, we can, we can, see how that goes and see if we need to do it more often. I think that would be great, but I would really need to rely on you to give me content and tell me what you guys are doing. And that's what's hard, I think, is to find that time to write up that entry or whatever. And I can, kind of try to, twist arms and that sort of thing. But I do think that that's one way we can do this. But it also sounds like a little bit like maybe there's this desire to meet more, to get together to some extent more than just once a year. I don't know.
I was thinking of what you were saying about the veggie growers list, because I think of, if you're thinking of busy people, like farmers are busy people, right? So, but how often does that come out? Like once a month? The list. I was like thinking about the little like notes from the field, like yeah, like tomatoes are great.
Yeah.
Cucumbers are tough.
I think Lauren curates that like
Yeah.
monthly, probably.
Monthly,
Yeah.
right? But it's like a really brief, right? But I'm thinking about it like if in reference to like riparian plantings, it could be like, okay, I don't know, this treatment worked really great.
Over maple seeding right now.
Right, right.
Very
right. When I had a great selection day. I don't know, anything that, very brief, that seemed relevant, like 3 lines, right?
Yeah, I think that's nice, and so especially if, it's just as, like Dave saying, I did this, and then everybody think, oh yeah, there's Dave, and, I don't know, there's sort of a, yeah, sorry. Yeah, right. Just to remind each other that we're out there and we're doing stuff.
Right.
It just helps build that sense of community.
Yeah, but if you read that regularly, you could be like, oh, right, I forgot they were growing tomatoes or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Oh, they're planting in this area. I forgot, right?
Right, yeah. So that's sort of different than a listserv, right? Or is it?
Yeah, no,
It's something that Vern curates on the listserv.
Okay.
He like asks for submissions and read it later, he sends out a
Right.
synopsis.
Compiled. Yeah.
So it's just,
It's like an addition,
it's what?
like an addition to
Okay.
the goal line.
Okay. So I just, curated like, high points or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. The state.
Yeah. Okay. So we're trying to run out of time, and I haven't even gotten to, so there's the barriers. So if you have, like, keep feeding the ideas here. I mean, I don't mean this to be the end of the list. But just as you come, if you come up with like, aha, or I wish I had said, then let me know. So I think I'd like to just focus on these 2 aspects. I think this is very general, and if you have ideas there, I mean, like, I think that this doesn't mean necessarily that I would do individual landowner outreach, but maybe if there's ways that I could facilitate your outreach to landowners or municipalities or whoever, that might be, you can maybe start to kind of think about that in the back of your mind, like, is there something that if we had a package that we could all use for that kind of work, for just general education or land outreach. I guess this is one thing that I'm interested in, but also if there's any other barriers that you think of that that you feel like really, is sort of high priority in terms of needing to be addressed. So you can, anything goes here. Jess. I don't know if other people run into this barrier, but between LCV and Dewey Pick, there's a serious funding gap. So in other words, you get an LCV award in December, and you do all the paperwork and you're ready to hit rolling. And all of us know you start January, December, right? Planning for summer projects full time. Dewey Pick's contract doesn't approve till like March, April, May, and technically you can't do any work till that contract signed. So like the 25 invoices, maybe some of us have, and the hundreds of hours we've done already might not be reimbursed because technically until, and you can try to push it through, but it's a line of how many. And that's super challenging. So I know some of our colleagues are like writing letters to Beck about, but I'm wondering if the Watershed Forestry Partnership would have any power or anyone in this room working for agencies. Has anyone else run into that challenge? And like a lot of us are pulling from our personal savings, like right now to do this work, which is kind of ridiculous. And I'm also nervous about like invoicing because technically any invoices before that date might not be reimbursed yet, right? But like, good luck ordering plants in April, right? So, yeah.
Okay, so that's more for communication to the,
It's like basic. Can I ask a question for Jess on that? Is it when the grant that you're applying for, are you applying like in December and then you're learning about it in February and then it's?
You applied for it way last year, go through all the rounds, you get your award letter in December, you scramble and do everything LCB asks you to, and they're pretty good on the turnaround. LCB, like contract, everything with fiscal sponsor, golden. But technically work can't start, nothing can be reimbursed until we pick it. And apparently LCB doesn't have a lot of power, at least from the LCB people I've been in touch with.
Right.
It's all at Dewey Pick, and the Dewey Pick administrators are like, kind of reprimanding, saying like, you just have to wait.
Right, yeah, I'm just wondering if somebody would have talked to Eric Howe, if they can shift it back even farther, so, but you would apply like 2 years in
We
advance.
mentioned that, and the two options they gave us are, one, just postpone the project for a year. And it's like, right, good luck with that. And then the other option is, we're like, when you just shift the project so you get awarded in beginning of the fall, and then you have that buffer.
Right.
They're like, well, that doesn't really work with our EPA, our IRS EPA funding cycle. So I don't know, someone said that help. Has this been an issue with other?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will 6-8 months for a contract from our interstate, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't spend our own money, unable to fulfill contracts we've already signed with other people, all that has happened to us at Intervale in the last couple of years too. And it's happening right now. Anyone have their contracts yet? Because we know, we're waiting on some of them.
Meeting that they're like, get to it.
Can advocacy be part of your role?
meaning.
Can you advocate for the needs of all of the parties?
It depends on what you mean by advocacy. I can't lobby the legislature.
Correct, yeah.
For example, but if it means, developing some sort of, like, here's why you should plant riparian buffers, and it's a little brochure that you send out or something.
I meant more like talk to state partners. Now, I don't mean the legislature, I mean like people at
DSP
ANR to be like, hey, I'm hearing from the partnership, these are the reasons plantings aren't happening.
I think I can facilitate that conversation, sure.
Or maybe others can. Like others, like others.
Like what I read, yeah. So yeah, if there's, we'll take if there's specific issues that you have that you kind of want communicated, that you don't feel like you do on your own, or that you think is sort of a, something that everybody shares. I think that's.
So as not an implementer, but a program administrator, I have a lot of questions around like cost benefit questions around like the value of including a professional crew in the budget versus a volunteer group. The how much it matters to have like stems of a certain size, how that impacts survivability. Maybe it matters less for certain species than others. I've heard sort of anecdotally that there are some that are just incredibly difficult to keep from drying out if they're too big when you receive them. I have a bunch of questions like that.
Yeah, I think we all do. Yeah.
How do we prioritize budget decisions? How do we make budget decisions?
Right. Yeah, Katie and I have talked a little bit about that. And I think that there's lots of them. I mean, do you put money into site preparation, or is it better just to, kind of keep replanting with trees? And maybe it's just as cheap to just keep planting with trees.
Yeah, can I pose a question?
Yeah,
Is the layer still here? You are. So you asked in Will's presentation and Sam's about like the benefit, do we have data on the benefit of like doing the manual follow-up, like string trimming? And I've been living in this stewardship and follow-up maintenance, like the last 5 to 8 years as we've been going back to being like, oh, we need to do more in these projects to help them along. What we haven't done is collect hard data of like, these are all the different methods we use and this is what we get from each of them. And this is why it would be important to fund them. Like, look how much more you get if you do string trimming or if you do spot spraying or if you walk away. Would that be that, like, I'd really like to know that, but would that be valuable? And would that help to make the case for, like, we're starting to get some funding for follow-up stewardship, and would that help to support it more, to keep that going? Yes.
Yeah, and I also feel like being able to use our network to show those things. Like, I think, there's only so much standardization of variables we can do sort of across our sites. So many of these decisions are, like you were saying earlier, just so site specific, but I also feel like there are enough of us and there are enough of our sites that we can sort of come up with some, maybe draw some conclusions from some of the practices that we're trying, and the results that we're seeing.
I think it's kind of a matter of getting somebody out there, I mean, having the funding to go out and do those counts. I mean, I think most groups that I know of anyway, I mean, that's one thing we don't have funding for is that, unless we're doing a pure crochet project and we have to, we have money to go out and set up a transect and do counts, that we don't have money to just go out and really kind of do, what I would consider just a more rigorous monitoring of our planning.
Yeah, if we did have the funding for that, would you have the ability to host the data set and to then take
Yeah,
it?
I think so. Yeah, and, I think, yeah, I would imagine that would be something. So to just collect it from everybody and put that together.
So I think it would be some kind of standardization of the data.
Yeah, right.
That, it's like a collection methods and then to get that out to all the groups. And then as we can come up together that funding to be able to have a place to send it would add a lot more meaning to that.
Because in the previous workshop, I mean, some groups are already collecting that data and they have that data available, it sounds like. So we can already, we already have some data that we can use.
You're talking about the pure crochet.
I don't know if it's pure crochet, but
we're talking about
frost for sure. They collect data. And some other people in the group also mentioned that they do collect data.
So Larry, you've been collecting.
We have been, but it's not, I mean, it's just on the few plantings that are like the Vermont Land Trust, like, it's that kind of, yeah, it's a very small number. And I don't know, I don't think it's like research grade, but it could be useful for people.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, like.
If that's what we have, that's what we've got for right now, and we can always sort of assess that data and then sort of see, is it rigorous enough, or do we feel comfortable enough with it to just sort of use it as a way to argue that we need more money for this account here, that site maintenance funding is necessary, or we can say this is really not good enough and we need to.
It feels like it could go both ways where like, if you were able to, with other people, kind of come up with like maybe some things that it would be good for groups to look at if they are monitoring, that goes out to people, and then that data could come back. But it would mean that right now it could be that like everyone's just sending you the information, but if there's like, if we do have a bunch of groups now who are going out to do this monitoring, it would be great to have like the questions that they don't have to, but if they can, like some standardization, even if it's not.
Could you set up like a Google form or something that like, if you're going and doing any monitoring, try to fill out as many of these answers and then refine it. We all get a little more.
And one thing that I should mention, and looking, are there any Intervale? Yeah. Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. Okay. We had talked a little bit about that maybe the site maintenance crews, when they do go out, that if they're out there anyway, they can count trees. And so, and that might actually make the day a little bit more fun and enjoyable if you have something to do besides the string camera around. So they're already out there and, there's no reason why, so for groups who have those, who are hiring the Intervale, and can just say, I don't know, it might even just fit into a day's worth of crew time, right? So it might not be an extra cost. I don't know. We could talk about that.
We can chat.
Yeah. But, or it might, they might tap on a little extra, fee for their, for that service. But anyway, but it just seems like that would be an obvious fit since they're often out there anyway. And so for those sites that they're doing that, we can start. There's Sarah, she's getting ready.
No, it's a little headphone.
It's almost 4:30. Any last idea that needs to be here? Okay, I'm going to do a very quick drawing. This well enough.
Too late to still throw cards.
Oh, yeah.
That was just going on. Which one's Peter's and which one's mine? I think at this point, the winner's mine.
There you go. Okay. Uh-oh, there's no line underneath.
Zero dribbled out. Yeah. 39.
55? Probably 59. Put the letters down, and so now I'm having the Miracord book that started it. What the. Everyone. All together, and then if you guys.
Yeah.
Everybody feels comfortable with that. We'll just, and if you don't want that, I'll draw for the pruners first, and if you say that, I'd really rather have a, winter twig. You want to play? Use the. Number 90, what's the pruners?
Big present for Wendy.
I had verified that she really is number 90. Okay. Yeah. All right. With that, I've got more of these. Yeah. And if I draw your name and you really don't want one, then we can redraw again. Okay, number 49. Oh, this feature. Oh, yeah. You really need some creativity. Number 48. That sounds like it's not ready. It's not. Three. One P5. Oh, that's me. Winter tree ID book. Yes.
Oh my.
It includes lots of other species that aren't riparian, so, Number 8.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think this was the one that I couldn't think.
I also feel it.
It is funny that it was.
We're gonna get back home and on with the day. What if we did the meeting in February rather than March? I had lots of feedback from, this is too late in the season.
Yeah.
We're already too busy.
Yes.
February,
Yes.
everybody raise their hand for February.
But not school vacation.
Right.
Vacation. Like they're right. Yeah. Who likes March better? February's better. I have another. Oh, the venue, I mean, it's the University of Vermont. I mean, we've got New York groups, we've got Vermont groups. It seems like this is a good central location.
That feels like a stretch. So that feels like a stretch,
Yeah. So.
but we don't mind coming here.
You know, so I'd say that the parking is really the only issue here. And I might next time try and just get the Silver Maple ballroom for the whole day. It's all be together. I think that's nice to have all of the different perspectives all in one place. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you.
Tom, will you email us the link?
Yes, we are seeing a spot. I have some experience that I need to take away, so that would be good too. Yeah, and I